We talked about how horizontal lines have a slope of 0 and our y equals a number. Vertical lines have a slope of undefined and our x equals a number. So the graph of y equals b, b being a number, is a what kind of line? Tell your neighbor. Horizontal or vertical? There's only two choices. Class, what is it? Horizontal. Like the horizon. Yep. And the line of graph y equals b passes through the point something. Let's actually draw what this would look like. I'm going to do it kind of out to the side. If I have a grid and I have this line, this horizontal line, and it's y equals b, which means b would have to be that right there, right? Okay, so what would be the point that it's passing through? Tell your neighbor.
Should we actually draw that with a graph?
If you want. Someone please tell me in 3, 2, 1, 0. Bella, thanks for raising your hand. What point would it be?
0, B.
Yeah, because on the y-axis, the x is always 0, but we are crossing through the point B, or the y is B at that point. So similarly, the graph of x equals a, you probably figured that out. That would have to be a vertical line, because x equals a number. And it's passing through the point, if we wanted to draw this out, it's passing through A. So what would the point have to be? Tell your neighbor. A, 0. The y is always 0 on the x-axis. So your y value would have to be 0, but the A is whatever number you go through. Hold on. So that means that we are not using any negative values for x, which is why you don't see any in the table. It's saying, I only want you to find the y values for things greater than 0. So when we're making a table, we don't have to do every number under the sun, because remember, we only need technically 2 points to make a line. We're going to find 4, just because we want to, because it's fun. So if you're trying to find y values, you, I hope, have done this before. I plug in my x values, I substitute it into my equation to get the y. If you need to write it out, that's fine. Y would be equal to 2 times, let's start with 0, plus 2. So I know that y would have to be 2, which is the y-intercept. You may have picked that up. You know the slope, so you could either do the table by the pattern. You know that the slope goes up 2 for every 1 in the x. Or you could keep plugging in. I say y is equal to 2 times 1 plus 2, so y would have to be 4. So I could keep going from there. What, 6, 8, 10, right? And you know that because your slope is plus 2. You have a table, you can plot these points. We've talked about this. 0, 2 is just a point. 1, 4 is just a point. So you plot all your points on the grid. Go ahead and do that. 0, 0, 2, 1, 4. Okay, this is what it should look like. Do I want to do this?
No.
Could someone explain to me why is that bad? Catherine? Yeah, it's going into the negative zone for x's. Is that allowed?
No.
No, it's saying the domain had to stop at 0. So actually start at 0. So we're going to actually get rid of that extra part there and make it what's called a ray. A ray starts at a point and continues infinitely in one direction. Question, we are not done because it says identify the range. Remember, range is all your possible y values. in this graph, what are my possible y values? Tell your neighbor. Where do they start? Where do they go? How about Cora? What's my range? Where do my y values start? And where do they go? Infinity and beyond, right? So we can say that the y values are greater than or equal to 2. They include 2 and everything above that, but they don't go below that. So we have a restricted range as well. Why have the independent and dependent axis, so why have the x and y axis, been moved to their location on the graph? If you notice they're in a different spot than normal, go ahead and talk about that with the person next to you. Why are they moved? 0. Xander, go ahead. Why are they moved?
Because it's the only quadrant that doesn't have any negatives.
Yeah. Can you have negative time in this? No, not in this world. And you can't really have negative distance. So, so it's because we only want positive. So the reason is because we want positive distance and time. It would not make sense to include the negatives on here because we can't use those values. You got to have a title, and you have to label your axes, and you have to number your axes. There is always, without a doubt, a question like this on the EOC where you have to do all of that stuff on the computer. It's annoying, but you got to know how to label your axes and number them, etc. So my title, Xander. You could do something like driving home. If you want to get more specific, by all means, go ahead. But it is a title. We need to label our independent and dependent axis. Remember, independent determines the dependent axis. So you want to figure out, okay, what thing is determining the other thing? What thing came first? Time is going to go over here. And make sure you label it in hours. On the y-axis, you want to have miles from home. Be careful. The y-axis is not the distance traveled. The y-axis is how many miles from home. Because if you look at your function, it goes from 200 minus 50t, which means you're losing distance. We're not calculating how long we've driven. We're calculating how much we have left to go with that equation. Now we need to scale our axes. If you look at the equation, you know it needs to start at 200. Ben, put it away. And go down 50 for every hour. I'm going to label the bottom 0. And then for every 4 squares, I'm going to label 50. So you want to try and spread out the graph. I don't want it scrunched up in the corner. So you're going to have to use your problem-solving skills to figure out what's the best way to scale it. You could have obviously done things a little bit differently. I like to really spread it out. Your goal is to try and spread it out as much as you can. You could also find your x and y intercepts to figure out, okay, where exactly is it going to hit on my x and y axis? But because this was in slope-intercept form, I didn't do that because it was pretty easy to calculate. Now you just graph your line. So let's see, I start at 200 and I go down 50 every hour. Down 50 over 1. This would be my first point. because my slope is negative 50 over 1. So you could have also done this with intercepts. Last thing we need to label is our domain and range. Domain is all my possible input values, because we're not talking about x here, we're talking about t in our equation. Keely, where does the x-axis, where does it start?
What?
Okay, where do I start using numbers on my x-axis?
At
0.
zero.
And where they stop using numbers?
At 4.
Yeah. So my time, t, so your input values would go from 0 to 4. Sarah, where would my output values, what's the range for those? 0 to 200. Yeah, same. So because of this problem, we're only using those specific values. We don't use anything more than that. That would be a different trip. Ooh, there's that question on the side. What's your distance home from after driving 1.5 hours? You could calculate that by plugging it into your equation. D equals 200 minus 50t. 1.5 hours. What would that be? 125 miles? There you go.